Let's catch up on some important news on how the Cardinals are continuing to win the offseason when it comes to their player development efforts and the hires that they're making to the staff. What's going on, everyone, and welcome into this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer with you. Hope everybody had a safe and healthy and happy Thanksgiving holiday weekend. We are back talking some Cardinals baseball here on this Monday, December 2nd, 2024. Today we're going to be breaking down and talking about a significant hire the Cardinals made last week right before the Thanksgiving holiday, as they have brought in Matt Pierpont from the Seattle Mariners organization, and they've named him the new director of pitching for the St. Louis Cardinals. We'll talk about what we think that might entail and why it could be significant for the Cardinals as they continue to make this progress toward adding infrastructure, adding executive positions and coaching positions throughout the organization to get better in an area that had sort of fallen by the wayside for the Cardinals. We know that the Major League roster and the way that the Cardinals might approach it this offseason is not going to be the number one priority or the top topic of conversation in terms of making big moves and splashy types of moves. But I think the Cardinals have been pretty splashy when it comes to the infrastructure moves that they're making toward this end. And I think Pierpont is another example of that. We'll talk about his credentials and kind of why the Cardinals might have considered him to be a quality name to target and hire for this director of pitching position that the Cardinals are essentially adding. I think this is basically a new role that, kind of like they did with Rob Cerfolio when they named him assistant general manager of player development and performance, they're kind of carving out new roles to beef up what had been maybe lacking in the organization. So we'll talk about Pierpont and what his role with the Cardinals is going to be and how it might help things establish down the road. But I want to take a moment to talk about a very exciting new partnership for B-Schaeff Daily. I've been talking about looking for local business partners to continue to progress this podcast forward, and I'm really excited to say that Smith Agri-Service is presenting today's episode of B-Schaeff Daily. Smith Agri-Service is a family-owned independent retailer providing farmers in Missouri, Illinois, and Iowa with competitive pricing on Corteva, BASF, generic brand crop protection products, and Brevant corn and soybean seed. Scan the QR code, text 202-988-1106, or get in touch with them via email, smithag@irtc.net. So let's dive in on the news. Matt Pierpont named the director of pitching of the St. Louis Cardinals, which is an additional position, really, from how the Cardinals have been approaching their pitching development in recent seasons. And he comes from a Mariners organization where he's been coaching for the past few years that at least, at the major league level, it is very difficult to argue with the production that the Mariners have been getting from their homegrown pitching talents in recent seasons. Now, it's not to say that Pierpont is directly responsible for all of this success. He signed on there in 2021, I believe still to pitch, to be continuing his minor league pitching career with them, but didn't end up pitching. I think that was the season. I've tried to do some digging on exactly how it came to be, but he was announced in 2022 as part of their organizational coaching staff, and I think in 2021 maybe kind of made that transition in a less official capacity, but at the beginning or prior to 2022 was named to the coaching staff and was, for that 2022 season, named the pitching coach of the High A Aqua Sox. I believe the Everett Aqua Sox, kind of a cool name, in 2022. And then in 2023, moved to more of a roving position, as I understand it. Assistant pitching coordinator was the name of his title coming into the 2023 season. And so I imagine that's where Pierpont got a little bit more involved throughout the minor leagues. When you have those pitching coordinator positions, you can have an influence over guys throughout the system, probably has some travel involved in that. And then this past season, 2024, he was their pitching coordinator. So no longer an assistant, but was the minor league pitching coordinator, working his way up through the system, and now the director of pitching for the Cardinals. So kind of, again, getting into some of the bureaucracy and the organizational titling of what certain guys are doing. Director of pitching is a step up from what he had been doing as a minor league pitching coordinator throughout the system. So bumping Matt Pierpont into a more prominent role. And Adam Jude is a beat writer covering the Mariners for the Seattle Times. I saw a tweet from him, does a great job, and he mentioned that Pierpont was kind of considering and was up for multiple potential big league coaching positions. I'll find the tweet here. Jude notes, for the second year in a row, the Mariners are losing a highly regarded minor league pitching coordinator. Matt Pierpont was a finalist for several big league pitching jobs over the past few weeks, and he ultimately takes over as the St. Louis Cardinals director of pitching. And I don't believe I have seen the Cardinals announce this move. If they've announced it, I've missed it, but it is officially going to happen. Matt Pierpont himself mentioning it on social media. He tweeted out on the 27th of November and said, to the entire Mariners organization, I just want to say thank you. There are no words to describe how special these past 4 years have been. It was an honor to be part of this organization and work alongside such incredible people. Excited for the next chapter with the Cardinals. So Matt Pierpont is coming to the Cardinals. He's already updated his bio, director of pitching for the St. Louis Cardinals. And for folks that want to follow Matt Pierpont, the new director of pitching for the Cardinals, you can do that at Matt Pierpont28 on Twitter. But basically all this to say that Matt Pierpont, who was a minor league pitcher for 7 seasons before that, was at Winthrop University over in South Carolina, played baseball for Winthrop, and I believe he studied exercise science. So here's Matt Pierpont. His career as a pitcher kind of comes to its end, meets its natural conclusion, just short of a big league opportunity. I think he had progressed up to AAA, if I'm not mistaken, but he ends up making that transition, kind of like we know Ollie Marmol when he was in the A-ball area of the Cardinals organization, kind of leveled off as a player, and the Cardinals said, well, you've obviously got a mind for this, join the coaching staff, and he works his way up. Similar story for Matt Pierpont, who had progressed to AAA as recently as 2019 with the Rockies. Looks like he spent his whole minor league career with the Colorado Rockies, had signed then with the Mariners. I guess the COVID year kind of probably put a bump in that, and then was signed on as a pitcher for 2021, never did pitch for them, and progressed into their coaching staff. So he ends up working his way through all the way up to minor league pitching coordinator over the organization, starts as an assistant, starts as an A-ball coach, works up to assistant, roving assistant, then he is the coordinator. And now with the Cardinals, he's the director as the Cardinals continue to invest, add these positions, and I think most importantly, when you look at this new reimagined front office, and it's obviously a transition year because we know that Mozeliak is not going to be a part of it after this season, but it is already reimagined because you've got Mo in his role, but you've also got Chaim Bloom elevated and taking on more of a role of prominence in his area of whether it's expertise or focus or however you want to define it, because he's kind of just the Pobo in waiting in terms of his title, but he is an active member of that front office going out and doing this. I think this is another Chaim Bloom move where he is in charge of kind of installing what the Cardinals are looking to do on this side of things. And Rob Cerfolio, obviously, when you want to look at the organizational hierarchy of it, Chaim Bloom brings in Cerfolio to be that assistant general manager, player development and performance, I believe is his title. And then this definitely is a hire that would fall underneath Rob Cerfolio, who the Cardinals, of course, brought over from the Cleveland Guardians and elevated him into a role that he was working his way up with Cleveland. He's just 32 years old. Pierpont just 33 years old. These are young, bright baseball minds that are sought after in the industry. I was bringing up the Adam Jude tweet because Seattle Times beat writer covering the Mariners mentioned that this was a guy that other teams were after. He had options to be part of big league coaching staffs, and he ends up with the Cardinals as the organization's director of pitching. I don't believe this will be an in-dugout, in-uniform role. I could be wrong about that, but it feels more like the overarching role that when you think about it on the hitting side, remember Jeff Albert sort of had that role as he was the hitting coach, but he was also doing a lot behind the scenes to sort of ramp up where the Cardinals wanted to be from a hitting perspective throughout the organization and what that philosophy looked like. Ends up leaving, talking about Jeff Albert still, and taking on a similar role with the Mets. The only difference was it's not an in-dugout role. At the time, Jeff Albert was the Cardinals hitting coach, but he was also doing all these other things. And it kind of makes sense that you would have multiple people for multiple roles. You want all of those people to be working in conjunction with one another and having synergy, obviously, when you're talking about things like philosophy and working to a certain goal for player development. But it makes sense to have additional resources, additional bodies, additional people, additional human capital to be able to get done what the Cardinals are looking to get done in terms of beefing up their player development and getting this thing back on track. So it's not to say that they're looking at Dusty Blake going, oh, he's not doing a good job. it's additional to what Dusty Blake is charged with doing. And in theory, these are two individuals, Dusty Blake and the new director of pitching, Matt Pierpont. These are two guys that are probably going to work in alignment in terms of, all right, here's at the big league level what we're looking to do, but here's how we get them to the big leagues and how we carry out a philosophy that's going to be one that, when they get to the big leagues, they're not surprised by anything. This is what organizationally everybody is on the same page about, and here's how we want to go about our business, and here's how, and that's very vague terminology to be able to identify and describe exactly what they'll be doing, but it's development, right? It's trying to get the most out of these young players that make it to the big league level. And for the director of pitching role, that's going to be one that, I think he'll have his hands in what the Cardinals are looking to do throughout the organization, but also director of pitching strikes me as a role that's going to be very involved at the big league level too. When you think about guys like Andre Palante and Michael McGreevy and some of these younger players that you're continually working to get more out of, those internal options, as we've called them over the years, that's kind of been a term that, we used as almost a pejorative because Cardinals fans wanted the team to go out and get that splashy, flashy free agent signing or make a big trade, but the Cardinals are, I think, recommitting themselves with the way that they're approaching this offseason to having those types of guys be put in the best possible positions to succeed. And so that's where a Matt Pierpont hire gets made and is somebody that's going to be given some authority throughout the organization. And I think when you talk about at the big league level all the way down, that's going to apply. And again, I made the comparison with Jeff Albert because that was a controversial figure when he was the Cardinals hitting coach. But when he left, he wasn't fired. Remember, he left of his own accord. And whether it was Twitter that ran him off or whatever, you might, that was sort of the vibe that he was not super happy to be with St. Louis at the end of it. And he was blamed for a lot of the issues that were perceived by the public as to why the big league club wasn't performing offensively up to whatever everybody's expectations were. But at the same time, the Cardinals felt like he was doing things at the minor league level maybe that were effective and were going to bear fruit ultimately. And so now you've had this transitionary period with the hitting coach situation where it was Turner Ward for a little bit, and now the Cardinals are going in another direction with Brant Brown, bringing him in and just trying to overhaul, maybe not overhaul, but tweak some of the things that on both the pitching and the hitting side, the Cardinals could stand to be in a better spot for. And of course, you had that on the pitching side anyway. Mike Maddox, I think, was somebody with such experience that you felt like he was the figurehead overseeing all of the pitching development and the planning and everything that went into that throughout the organization, yes, at the big league level, but also influence over how things were conducted throughout the minors. Dusty Blake comes along. Cardinals very high on him, believe he is, somebody at the time when they hired him to be the lead pitching coach, had a bright future in the game. And I'm sure they still believe that he does. And you could look at what the Cardinals did at the big league level this past season, and they did seem to, from a pitching perspective, have some of those younger players really take steps forward. Maybe not in the way that it happened on the offensive side of the ball. But yeah, Andre Palante is a guy that's an example. And the coaching of Dusty Blake and the folks throughout the system being able to get Palante into a spot where he was able to unlock something different when they returned him to a starter's role. That's all stuff that does happen. That's an example of player development gone right, even though there would be folks that would make the case, the Cardinals, should have discovered it sooner, should have been more on top of it. Whatever the case might be, everybody's going to have opinions, but I think you can look at Palante and say that's an example of that going in a very positive direction with a very productive result. And can adding somebody like Matt Pierpont be an avenue toward the Cardinals having more eyeballs on these situations, having just more experience, having more intel, having more data, having more of a good way to process the data. This is what we were talking about. This is what Chaim Bloom was talking about at that end of season press conference when it came to the Cardinals needed to do some things and progress in a direction that the game is going. And I think we're seeing examples of that with the hires being made. And do I know everything about Matt Pierpont? Certainly not. But I trust, again, kind of like when we talked about Rob Cerfolio being hired. Okay, where is he coming from? And what does that team do right now that the Cardinals would like to emulate and would like to be able to model after? Well, we know that Cleveland, when it comes to player development, continues to churn out guys that contribute at the big league level that we're like, we don't even know who these guys are. As just, baseball fans in general, you kind of always have that response of, well, where'd that guy come from? How do the Guardians keep doing it? Well, you want to have people that are part of that process with Cleveland. Okay, bring in Cerfolio, have him do that for us. Chaim Bloom is another example. Okay, he did this with Tampa. We liked what he did in that regard with Boston, but the Red Sox kind of tired of him. They got rid of him. But we think he can really be a difference maker in our organization because we've seen his track record. We've seen the track record of the Guardians, and Cerfolio was instrumental in a lot of what they were doing kind of underneath the hood in that organization when it comes to player development. Okay, bring that guy in. Now, Matt Pierpont, like, how involved was he? He was there for a good bit. Again, 2021, I think, is when he started to kind of get his feet wet. And then 22, 23, 24, he's got official roles within the organization. In the past 2 seasons, it was throughout the minor leagues that he was working with guys. And it's interesting, too, that I mentioned from the Adam Jude tweet, he said second year in a row that the Mariners lose a prominent minor league pitching coordinator to another organization. I'm checking this here. I believe it was Max Weiner, not sure how you pronounce the man's last name, but I think he became the pitching coach for Texas University. That's obviously SEC baseball, and you're at the highest level of that organization. So he went from pitching coordinator with the Mariners to the pitching coach for the Texas Longhorns. And again, SEC baseball is a big deal. So that's understandably a role that he would have sought after. And I assume if I'm looking up Max Weiner that he probably pitched for Texas, maybe. I don't know. Doesn't really matter. The Mariners lost him, and then that's how the promotion happened for Matt Pierpont last year, coming into 2024 to the pitching coordinator role with Seattle. But he was the assistant the prior year, gets promoted because the spot becomes available, and they say, yes, promote from within. This guy is good at what he does. And now the Cardinals see that, and apparently other teams as well were after him this offseason, and they end up getting Pierpont, and the Cardinals say, to get you to come, we're not going to say, hey, come be our pitching coordinator. It's the same. No, we're going to give you the director title. It establishes probably, again, higher salary and more prominence within the organization, more responsibilities, more cachet for the role that he's taking. The Cardinals offered him a promotion by basically creating a role for what it's going to be that Matt Pierpont does with the Cardinals. Now, it's kind of hard to say, give him credit for George Kirby, give him credit for Logan Gilbert. Luis Castillo was somebody that was brought in from external. But you can talk about guys like Bryce Miller, Brian Wu. I know that Brian Wu, these guys have been at the big league level and getting opportunities over the past couple of seasons. I'd have to go in each case and look at exactly how long those guys have been around at the big league level. But yeah, just 2023, 2024 are the only seasons that Miller has pitched at the big league level. And before that was working throughout the minors. So I think it's probably a pretty good guess that when you think about some of the names like Brian Wu, like Bryce Miller, that had such success last year for the Mariners at the big league level, and I'm sure there are other examples that you could come up with, Emerson Hancock being guided along in that organization, all those pitching prospects that Matt Pierpont has certainly been working with over the past couple of years at least. Obviously with the high A Aqua Sox in 2022, maybe not as involved with the organization at large, but after that, where he is the coordinator throughout the minors, certainly something that I think you would probably get your fingerprints on a number of these guys that have been just so successful for the Mariners. It's why last offseason we were talking about the Cardinals, would they match with Seattle, because we know that their guy DePoto really likes to trade, and the Cardinals have all these position players. They really could use some pitching. The Mariners said, yeah, we're not really trading those guys, and they didn't. And they ended up having a really solid season in terms of their pitching, and now they're kind of looking to fix the hitting side of things in Seattle for sure. But if you look at the numbers in terms of pitching for the Mariners, last few seasons, maybe don't count 2022 because, again, you're talking about this Matt Pierpont had just gotten really his feet wet the year before and takes a high A pitching coach job. But they are 8th in baseball in ERA. The Mariners were in 2022. 3.59. So, okay, obviously a pre-existing group of pitchers that knew what they were doing. But then 2023, Mariners were 3rd in baseball in ERA, 3.74. And that was the year that Pierpont was the assistant pitching coordinator throughout the minor leagues, one of those roving instructors. You hear that term a lot. Last year, 2nd in baseball and virtually tied for the top in ERA with the Braves, 3.49 ERA for the Mariners last season, the year in which Pierpont served as the head pitching coordinator throughout the Mariner organization. So, again, how much credit can you really give for guys that were already kind of making their way to the big league level? Fair to ask, but they've got young pitchers who you think about coaches that are down there at spring training, coaches that are, I guess for the Mariners, they're over in Arizona. It's more of an over there than a down there. Like we always say down there because it's Florida geographically compared to St. Louis. Anyway, you feel like there's a lot of coaching moments that happen and a lot of involvement that somebody like Matt Pierpont over the past few years as he has cut his teeth in coaching would have had on a lot of these guys. And the Mariners have been very, very successful. It's inarguable. But they've also developed, and they've also gotten the most out of those guys when they get to the big league level. If you're telling me that the Cardinals this offseason have made a couple of main additions, and Rob Cerfolio coming from the Guardians, and now this individual, Matt Pierpont, coming over from Seattle, are two of the splashy, noteworthy hires that they've made, going all the way back to October when they promised, or they said, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to maybe not spend as much on the big league payroll, but there will be an investment in the infrastructure and what's going on surrounding that. I don't see how you could argue that this type of hire of a Cerfolio and then a Matt Pierpont aren't exactly what the Cardinals said they were going to do. And then when you think about, in both cases, it was said that, yeah, the other teams wanted this guy. The Cleveland Guardians didn't want to lose Rob Cerfolio, right? So, like, these are moves that are being made by what I call a reimagined front office already, because I don't think these things happen if it's just John Mozeliak going into another year trying to nail the hires. I think it's Chaim Bloom's influence where you say, this is the direction we need to be going. And Chaim Bloom then adding Cerfolio, who then, I think more will come out about it. I don't think the Cardinals have even officially announced the Pierpont move. But that's exactly the type of stuff that Cardinals fans, in my opinion, should have been hoping for when the Cardinals sat down in early October or end of September, whenever the date of that presser actually was, to talk about what this offseason would bring. Credit where it's due, man. I think the Cardinals are nailing it right now. And this has to come to fruition, and you have to see it play out over the course of time. But there's reason to be excited because I think the strategy makes sense. It absolutely matches a course of action that in our heads we've always kind of thought, yeah, don't the Cardinals really need to do a better job of getting more out of their guys that they call up? And why don't they have these prospects really thriving as often as it seems like they used to? I think these moves that are being made right now, you may not notice right away in 2025, the Cardinals being able to turn around a system and start churning out guys that are not only young and coming up and contributing, but they're doing it in a positive way where you're able to end up making the playoffs and winning Central Division championships and getting world titles back in St. Louis. I think it's 100% the direction the Cardinals needed to be going, and it looks like it's working. And they're getting these, I think these are sought-after individuals based on what everything is being reported and said about some of the hires. I think the Cardinals are going out and basically one slam dunk after another. It's kind of hard. I can understand why people might be a little bit skeptical of me saying that, because you're like, Brenden, nothing's actually happened. But when you look around and the vibe of what the Cardinals are doing and the types of individuals they're bringing in and from where, those are really the only breadcrumbs that we have right now. And when time after time it gets said by people that would seemingly know it, like, oh yeah, this is an individual that the Cardinals were able to land and he had other options and he's choosing to come to St. Louis. I think that's because the Cardinals are putting together the infrastructure that they promised fans in that end-of-season press conference. Let me know if you guys are excited about the Matt Pierpont hire. I think it's a good one. I think it's one that you'll have to be patient with. Again, I don't know that everything's just going to happen overnight, but it does feel like the wheels are in motion toward getting the Cardinals back to where they want to be when it comes to player development and performance. It's a key aspect of this offseason, and even though the big league club might not go out and sign a Juan Soto, right? But I think there are things that are happening that Cardinals fans can be excited about. So I'm curious. Let me know in the comments if you are excited about it. And with the winter meetings coming up, going to be a lot of other topics for us to get into this week. We'll get into the Tommy Edman signing with the Dodgers. He ends up being the latest to cash in on an extension from Los Angeles, or an extension/signing, as they're pretty busy this time of year, and that's no exception this winter. So we'll talk about the Tommy Edman deal in a future episode. Continue asking questions, because there was somebody in a YouTube comment that said, hey, I want to hear your take on Matt Pierpont, which made me realize, yeah, I probably need to talk about that. Kind of slipped my mind through the Thanksgiving holiday, but I take your guys' suggestions whenever possible, and if there's something y'all want to hear about from a Cardinals standpoint, let me have it. Let me know in the YouTube comments below. Make sure you guys are following B-Schaeff Daily on Spotify as well. And thank you once again to Smith Agri Service for presenting this episode of B-Schaeff Daily. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.